Hey everyone, welcome to the Cool Table. Tonight's discussion is Leigh Bardugo's Shadow and Bone. It's the first book in the Grishaverse trilogy, and I have to say it has been a minute since I read any 20 teens young adult books, and it's certainly been almost a decade since I read this one, which came out in 2012, and I read it when it came out. But it felt like stepping into like a little warm literary bath. It was pleasant and familiar, it was pleasurable. The story, but like the reading experience as well. Like I haven't read YA like that in a long time. So Heidi, what is your experience with reading the Grisha trilogy?
I did not read the first one when it came out, but I do remember waiting for the third. So it must have been around 2014, 2015, somewhere in there. That's when I had my third kid. So I probably was just binging all night long while I was up with her. And then since then, I have read everything Leigh Bardugo has written, like as they've released. Love her work. I'm excited to talk about this one. My experience reading it again this week was very different than my experience reading it 10 years ago. So, or however long it's been. So it's going to be fun to kind of compare. I don't know who changed. Is it me? Is it books? It's so interesting. I don't know.
I mean, that is a really fun conversation to have. Because it was different for me too. I read again, like I read it in 2012 when it came out. I wrote about Siege and Storm when it came out. I did a fake interview with Leigh Bardugo on our former site, That's Normal, and met her at Y'all Fest and had a really good time around the time Siege and Storm came out. And when Ruin and Rising came out, I wanted to read it, but it wasn't like I was already out of that genre a little bit. It wasn't really something that I was super interested in, but I did read it and liked it. And then I loved Six of Crows when it came out. But when I read it in 2012, it really stood out as a favorite. I was reading so much YA at that time. I mean, 2010, 2011, 2012, I was just getting all of it that I could get. And it was one that I gave 5 stars and put on my favorites list as soon as I got done reading it. And the only note that I made when I finished it was, that's how you write a villain people can love. That was my review of Shadow and Bone back in June of 2012. So I think that's a good place to start. Hello to everyone. Alicia, Emma, those of you that are watching in the chat, whether you're on Facebook or Twitter or here on YouTube, hello, say hi to us in the chat and we will talk back. I want to start with what I love about this book. And if I'm going to be honest, that means I have to start with the Darkling. And that's who we have to talk about. So we asked on Twitter today, just did a quick poll to see where people's feelings on the Darkling was, because he is obviously a very controversial figure. So the question was, have you read Shadow and Bone? Answer the following very important poll for our Grisha Book Club tonight, please. The Darkling is hot and misunderstood, hot and tortured, hot and evil, not hot, see evil. So if you don't know, what do you think won? Misunderstood, tortured, evil, or not hot?
Oh, I'm going to go with hot and tortured, because that's what I would have voted for.
Yes, that is what I voted for, was hot and tortured. But hot and evil won by a landslide.
Oh, wow.
Hot and evil was almost 50%. And then it was not hot, see evil at 19. Hot and tortured came in also at 19. And hot and misunderstood only got 14% of the vote. So it seems like our audience is not about the Darkling. What do you guys think in the chat?
I wonder, though, it's hard to differentiate if I'm only talking about this book. If I'm talking about Shadow and Bone, he's very clearly just evil and tortured. If we're going to go further into canon, sure, I can see evil, like spoiler alert on that. But for this, in and of itself, I just don't see evil. I think he had his reasons. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think my very first read of this, the very first time I read it, obviously he's hot. And you're thinking in your mind, okay, this protagonist is meeting this super hot guy who's into her, and they're going to be a good match for one another. And when I got done with it, I still, even though he kills an entire village, I mean, that's a whole last genocide, I was kind of like, but he's doing it for good reasons. Alicia said, yes, all the Darkling, even though I know what I know, I still had all the feels during my second read. She calls him hot and evil. And then Emma said, he seems too over the top, mustache twirling evil at the end. It feels like a fake out, maybe. Very, very good insight. It does feel like it's a fake out. The Darkling feels he's ancient. He's the one responsible for the fold. He's the black heretic. That's the whole twist. And it hit me hard in 2012. And, you know, this time I saw him making those moves and they felt more tortured to me than they did back then. When you get to the twist the first time, I felt like, oh my gosh, what a twist. You know, I don't know how I feel about this, but this time I was like, oh, he's making specific moves in order to do something specific. And Bagra's the only way that we really get a good explanation of what he's doing. And it felt like maybe that's not correct. I don't know.
So this time through, I remember the first time still feeling like there's a redemption that could come in the following books. This time around, it felt much more manipulative. It felt much more like he was using her as a chess piece. But again, why did she just believe Bagra so quickly? Like she was like, yeah, that's right. I'm going to drop everything I've learned for all of these months and believe everything you said and make a run for it. That was
that made me
off the wall.
That was very weird. But why do we love the Darkling? For those who like fall in love with him, what is the reason? If you're in the chat, let us know. Why do you actually love him? Alicia says, the first time I read it, I wanted a redemption story so bad, all the way through Ruin and Rising.
I think it's because he saw something in her that was powerful and amazing, and he empowered that in her. And it ultimately, maybe he's using it for his own ends, but it felt like he saw something in her that no one else was seeing. She felt so invisible, and then she was seen. And so it made me like him, because it was like, yeah, it's kind of that wallflower, like, oh, the girl all against the wall and the rake comes in, or the powerful man comes in and notices her. So that's why I was like, oh, finally, like the poor ugly duckling is going to get the powerful man. Now that's not as interesting to me now, reading it this many years later. And I'm not sure why that is. But at the time I was like, yes, kiss him behind that wall. That was so hot with that hand going up his thigh. So hot.
Well, I 100% agree. And I think what happens is the stuff that he does to her, the sexy way that he interacts with her, is very normal romance novel kind of material. I mean, he's kissing her neck and whispering like, the problem with wanting is that it makes us weak. You know, I mean, that is a romance hero thing, like the tortured, I shouldn't want you, but I do want you. And I'm the first time he kisses her, when he pulls back, he like looks shocked. Like, I can't believe I did that. And later on, Bagra's like, you think he doesn't know how to lie to you because you're a naive little girl? And she's probably right. But when you're reading it and you don't know that about him, those scenes are super hot. And they're very much the way a romance hero acts around the wallflower, especially a hero who doesn't want a wallflower, which is what you tend to think about what's going on with the two of them. So it's hot.
100%. Super hot.
Yeah. Alicia says he's the anti-Mal. That's enough reason for me to love him. That's really nice. Emma says the first kiss comes out of nowhere. No, yeah, it does. I mean, he's essentially like just told her she's not powerful enough. And then while they're talking about it on the road, he just plants one on her. So I think that that's why you love him is he's hot, he's powerful. Everybody in the book is in awe of him. Everybody in the book is, fears him to some degree. And we're very used to especially back in 2012 when I read this, like our heroes being untouchable or being the billionaire or being, the vampire, and being the one that like you can't access their inner life. You can't access who they are. You can't be as cool. You can't be as big as they are. And so he embodied that. And, it isn't until the end that you see him turn into an evil creature, this evil guy with these horrible ideas. But you're still at the end of the book that maybe that's not going to come. Elena's still kind of hoping that he's going to get redeemed at the end of the book. So I think that's why we love him. I think he's just regular romance novel fodder, and becomes a genocidal maniac later on.
I think you're right. I think though that does take a turn with the collar with her. Like as soon as he puts a collar on her, then it's less endearing because she was his slave. So that's whenever this time around that really bothered me. I don't remember that bothering me the first time that much. I think I had a lot more like love in my, like I had a lot more grace for the Darkling than I did this time around, probably because I know the whole story from here. Yeah.
And we're not as enamored with him because he's not the romantic hero, and we know that. But even back then, collaring, I was reading a lot of BDSM back then too, and it wasn't particularly unhot. I gotta be real there. It was still something that like, oh, he has to cut her to get her power to come out. Okay. And he's gonna put a collar on her. Okay, this is shit I am used to.
You're right. I hadn't thought about the context of it. That's absolutely true.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I think it's just the place you're in when you're reading it, and probably the place that Leigh Bardugo was in a little bit when she wrote it. I'm not saying that she was reading that same kind of stuff. I'm saying like there's an element of the 20 teens in this book that I forgot about. And when I went back and read it, I was like, this feels like the 20 teens.
So true.
Yeah. So is he redeemable? At the end of this book, do you feel like he is a character that could go on and have a redeeming future? Is he a Kylo Ren that can, not be a genocidal maniac eventually, or what?
I think so, because of how his followers and the other people of Ravkin were reacting to his choices at the end in the Shadowfold. They were super supportive. There's a line that says they were beaming with happiness with what he was doing. So sure, if that was ultimately what the goal was, I could totally see him being redeeming if his ultimate goal.
Uh-oh, you froze a bit. I was actually going to talk about that while we hope that Heidi comes back. There's a great and like super prescient paragraph at the very end of the book where the Grisha are doing that. They're like beaming over what's going on. And they say, when the Grisha watch the Darkling expand the fold and start a new era, they are beaming even after they've seen what he can do. Even after watching their own people die, the Darkling wasn't just offering them an end to war, but an end to weakness. And despite their fear, they loved him for it. And it felt so Trumpian. I was dying. I was like, this is 2012. And we're talking about how these people just wanted more power and they were okay with their leader doing something horrific, watching their own people die. I was like, COVID. I mean, like there was a new article that just came out today of 400,000 deaths could have been prevented if Trump and the GOP had done a better job getting people the correct medical information. And all these people watching their own people die, and they still are shilling for someone who did that specifically and purposefully. And that particular quote just like jumped out at me, scary as hell. Emma just said, yes, this part reminded me of Trump. So I think he has the potential to move forward and be redeemable. But I mean, we know, if you know what happens to any of the rest of the books, it doesn't happen and he becomes less and less redeemable, but still is kind of hot sometimes. I mean,
especially when you picture Ben Barnes. It's like the second read through with Ben Barnes in my head. I was like, yes, Darkling.
I know. So when you first read this, did you think that the Darkling was in game for Elena? Like, did you think that was where it was going?
I did. Yes. 100% I did. Because of the power that they both held. Like she was his foil, sun, dark to light, sun to night. And so she has the potential to live forever like he does versus Mal, who's, going to die in a couple of years.
Right.
Conditions are not great there. So he's not going to last that long. So she can at the time I remember thinking like she's young, Mal's cute, and like the guy she had a crush on her whole life, let her do her thing, and then they can come around and live for the next hundreds and hundreds of years together. That was my thinking at the time, for sure.
Yeah, I thought it was inevitable because they are like they keep having this refrain of like calls to like, and they are two sides of the same coin. And he seems like somebody who's been looking for his equal for a really long time, if not for centuries or whatever. And so I thought that there was inevitability between the two of them. So I I'm the kind of person who, when I read Rune and Rising, is probably why I didn't love it so much, because I would have preferred a more like sticky situation that gets them together in the end. I was a Darklina stan, I guess. Does he deserve her?
Not as the book stands. No,
Right.
he doesn't deserve her right now. Not as this book stands. But I think there's potential there for him to have explained his actions better, or even if he'd had a little bit more time, if she hadn't run off, I think he could have Stockholm syndrome her just a little bit more, and then maybe, then maybe he would have deserved her.
Like if he really like grew her power into something good or whatever, really gave her her own agency instead of collaring her and not letting her have it. Someone asked this question in a group, and I thought it was interesting. Does she deserve him?
Does she deserve him? I mean, no, she was such a child in this book. Like, she was just a tiny little baby. She had no idea what she was doing. No, I don't think she deserved him, but I could see him, and in the context of like you were talking, like Billionaire's Red Room thing, like wanting that young ingenue. So deserves, maybe not, but it would have worked. Yes.
Yeah. Alicia just said, spoiler, Nikolai's the only one who deserves her. It is a cute spoiler. So let's talk about Mal and Elena a little bit. When you read it the first time, what did you think of Mal?
I hated him. I hated him the first time I read this thing. I thought he was whiny and didn't let her have her own life and was running off and hurting her feelings all the time. Hated him. It was very much like that YA angsty first love, and the guy's just a jerk who wants to be around all the hot popular girls, and he's leaving his childhood friend behind. Hated him.
Yeah. Same. I had no affinity for Mal in the first one, which is weird because reading it now, their love seems inevitable to me, which I don't understand how I'm so different. But yeah, now when they fall in love, I'm like, oh, that's right. Yes. I mean, yes, forgive him for being like into other girls and stuff like that. Like, of course they were meant to be together. The prologue is about them and they've grown up together. They are the abandoned. They're the orphans. And he's also obviously an amplifier. He's the one who brings out her power the first time. You know, like she has her arms around him in his blood when the light comes out on the skiff. So he has the potential to do for her what the Darkling does as well, but in a way that is for her and not for himself. And that's what I saw this time, when in the first time I was like, he sucks. He's poor. I mean, like, that's where my mind was.
This time around, I was like, he just felt he was young. Oh, am I breaking up? He was young and in love with,
you did,
like, I mean, maybe on, okay. This time around, Mal seemed much just like a kid. Like, of course, he's 19, 20 years old. Of course, he's messing around and drinking with his buddies and they're going to war. And, you know, so it didn't bother me. I think I had my expectations of teenagers, maybe because I have older children that are getting to those years, or I don't know what it is, but I just felt like leave him alone. He was a kid and he figured out what he needed and he was there. He tracked you down in the woods. Like, just accept him for who he is.
Yeah. Alicia just said, I hated him then and I still hate him. He is also the one who continuously holds her back, which I don't know that I agree with. I think that he, in this book, is doing all that he can to get her, to move her forward. I mean, I think in the beginning, when he sees her at the night of the ball or whatever, is kind of like shitty to her, but he apologizes for that. And then they go forward to get the stag together. And he deserts the army for her. And he doesn't push himself on her, despite the fact that he is in love with her. He waits a really, really long time to even declare himself. And I just felt, I feel like there's real love there. There's real affinity. And I don't know. Emma just said, I thought he seemed meh, but I'm really over love triangle tropes. So both relationships don't excite me because they feel predictable. The boy next door and the bad man. This leads into a really great discussion of whether or not this is just the blandest of bland kind of books. I'm talking mostly about Elena, but there's a lot of like world building that just feels very blank in something that my memory is super rich. And I don't know if that's because I'm remembering stuff from Six of Crows or just excited about the show that's coming up, but I feel like the reader's capable of putting themselves in Elena's place really easily because she is so blank slate. Very little personality, very little going on with her. Her main characteristics are being orphaned and being attracted to Mal, and then being unsure of herself. Those are what she has going for her. And it felt very YA little, Mary Sue girl to me. And I didn't love it. I missed the fact, I feel like I've read much richer fantasy in the ensuing years. What did you think?
Yeah, this time around, like you said, I've read so much since then, probably because these inspired me to keep reading in the genre. So like, I'll give it its due. But the stories it didn't feel super well developed as far as like what her motivations were. Sure, her motivation to suppress her powers was to stay with Mal. So, and her safety. So I guess if you buy into that, but they really did throw you into the small sciences and the different houses and what the different fabricator or the gowns represented. Like it didn't feel, I also don't think I could even picture what the little palace looks like. I don't feel like it was super well fleshed out, other than like there's woods around it, I think, where Vagra is. It's all kind of just a mess in my head, other than liking the vastness. Probably Nikolai, honestly, coming in on that ship. That's what I really remember from these books later on.
Yeah. I mean, it feels like the Russian elements of it are parts that are built up in my head, but then weren't in the book really, other than a few language things. And the fact that the little palace had a dome, it didn't feel like it was really steeped in that. And yet all of the imagery of these books and later editions and all of the stuff that you see is that it's very Russian inspired, and that feels tacked on after the fact, or just not really there. But also the world building itself, like why are they at war? Why, why is Ravka at war with these other nations? And what's really going on with the small sciences in terms of how do they affect the world itself? What kind of world is it? What's the level of arms capabilities? At some point they talk about like some guns that the other nation has. And I'm like, but you guys have guns. Are they just muskets? Are they just like, It just was a very, on the second read, it just felt, maybe because I read it, it was so easy to read, but the world building just felt, really lacking. It almost felt middle grade in that way. If there'd been less blood and the small amount of sexual content that's in it, I would have thought this is a middle grade novel because of that. Weird.
Yeah.
So Elena in general, I mean, there's a lot. Who's talking about Elena?
Yeah, I saw something I wanted to read you. Emma asked, does Mal hold her back, or does she hold herself back for him? And then they go on in the comments to talk about how, she's often holding herself back.
Well, that's the whole thing, right? She makes herself ill from the beginning. Like her whole life, she's been making herself ill, holding herself back for Mal. So there's that.
But saying is that she actually did wrong until she let him go. And I didn't necessarily read it that way. I saw it more as her accepting herself. And that's why that trope of like her being ugly and weak and then becoming strong didn't bother me, because it didn't feel like it was about men as much as it was about her embracing her own power.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm way more feminist now than I was 10 years ago. I don't know. That's how I read that.
I can't tell, because she's either thinking about the Darkling, or she's thinking about Mal, or she's thinking about how Genya is prettier than her. So there's that's kind of it. And so that's what I mean by her being kind of a blank, or being kind of your prototype YA protagonist from the 20 teens. There's just not a lot there. And that actually wasn't the case with a lot of the books. As I was reading through what I had read in those years, there's like, and maybe I need to go back and read them, but the Lumentir Chronicles and Graceling and Grave Mercy, and just like a bunch of these YA books that are fantasy driven, where I remember the women being the point of those books. So I'll have to maybe go back and reread some of the stuff that I read all at the same time and see if I still feel that way. And when I reread this, I was like, she doesn't have much going on. But somebody who does have a lot going on is the Apparat. Is that how we say that? I don't know. But he's obviously Rasputin. I mean, he's literally got the most Rasputin vibes of any character who isn't Rasputin. He's got long brown robes and a dirty black beard, eerie intensity, smelled like mildew and incense, jumbly stained teeth, black gums. I mean, he is Rasputin. So he's got a lot going on, but I don't even remember what he does in later books. He steals her, right? Puts her in the tombs.
Yeah, I can't really remember. I think he is maybe big in the King of Scars books, or at least one of his proteges are. I remember the religious part of it gets heavier later, but I can't.
Yeah.
That's all lost on me.
I know that he takes her and puts her in like the catacombs and makes her like tries to, she can't use her power, and she's down there with all these religious zealots and stuff like that. I think that might be in Rune and Rising. But I enjoyed the little glimpses of him because he was so obviously Rasputin. It was pretty funny. Vagra, we talked about her a little bit. I don't understand, and I guess they tell us later why they're still alive.
I think it's just the immense power that they have. That's why they're able to stay alive.
I never really liked the fact that she was a Darkling as well, or that she had the same power that he had. It seemed like it was something that he should be the only one that could do that. Heidi's frozen again. They do mention at one point, Alicia just said, the world building also bogged down on my first read. It took much longer to read the first time because I got bored. And they mention Nikolai at some point. They talk about the puppy second prince that we never see. They should never say his name. So that was fun.
And I don't remember knowing that he was illegitimate in the first book. I thought that came out like as a surprise later on, but that was canon from first shot.
Yeah.
But I guess the whole Nikolai, Rasputin, I guess all those Russian things are pretty obvious now that you say.
Yeah. Emma just said, wasn't it because their magic generated an energy or something that prolonged their lives? I think so, but I still don't think that she should have also been a Darkling. I feel like it just doesn't make sense. I don't like it. I think that somebody who knew who he was, it should have been somebody else, like a witch or an oracle or something like that, or the world, she figured it out by going to the library and, making the case for herself or something like that. It would have been better than if just his mom is old and lives in Hagrid's hut down the street.
Hagrid's hut. Do they go into Elena's parents and history later on?
Oh, never? I don't know if they do later on.
I don't remember.
Yeah, I really do not remember. When she saw the Duke, I thought we were going to get some kind of information about who she is, but no. So I don't know. But I still think it's going to make a really great show. I'm super looking forward to Shadow and Bone. I mean, mostly because of the Six of Crows stuff and because of Ben Barnes, but it's still going to be, I think, really, really good to watch, and will make for a good fantasy show. Maybe what it's missing in the book will translate better to screen, I think.
Yeah, I think the simplicity of the plot points will be very easy to hit in a TV show. It's not like you're going to have a ton of we didn't have the background information reading it, so I guess we're not going to need it in the show either. They can kind of slide right in.
Yeah. I mean, I even think we saw most of the book in the trailer.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we saw a ton of the book in the trailer. So I was actually surprised. I was wondering in my brain, why do I not remember more about Shadow and Bone? What happens after that? And I was like, oh, because that's it.
And if you're reading it on Kindle, because I don't know where my original copy went, so I ordered it again, and the book ends at 60%. So I kept feeling like we were only halfway through the book. So I couldn't remember where it ended, because then they have that extra stuff at the end, and so it's a really short. It was a really short story for our first one. It didn't feel.
This is not a big novel, and it's YA, so the words are super big. It's very short. I think it's only 340 pages or something. It's not a lot. Anyway, because it's not a lot, we don't have a lot to say about it. Emma just said the actor that plays the Darkling, thumbs down. No, Emma. No, Ben Barnes is great. Although I do think he's a little too
pretty,
good looking. Yeah, he's a little too precious for the Darkling, but I still think he's going to do a really good job. And Alicia said she's nervous about Six of Crows being merged in here because of the timeline. Well, the Six of Crows stuff is prequel. So it's merged in, but it's all new material that's not from the book. So the timeline is going to work. You're just going to get to see things that they're doing as the dregs, which is really cool. Very excited about that. And Shallon just got on and says, are we really wrapping up? Yes. I have nothing else to say about this. And I need to go and be with my family for the night. But, it's 30 minutes. We've had 30 minutes of talking about Shadow and Bone. It's not so bad. We'll talk about it again. We're going to do Six of Crows in a couple of weeks. And then be ready to talk about the show when it comes to Netflix in April. So we will see you guys then.
So excited.
Thank you guys for joining us. We'll see you soon.